I had been stationed at the forward reconnaissance post outside Corona, New Mexico for 3 months. My assignment: observe and report any anomalies along the aerial sweep perimeter. The mission, ostensibly routine, was under the direct jurisdiction of Mossad liaison with U.S. intelligence, a fact we were instructed to treat as non-existent in any public record. That night, the desert was unusually silent. No wind, no insect hum, only the faint hiss of oxygen regulators in my portable field suit. Stars were sharp, unnaturally sharp, as if the universe itself had been sharpened for inspection. The radio crackled intermittently, each burst of static like the sigh of some distant, impatient entity. We were in position when the object appeared. I can describe its motion in mechanical terms: angular velocity, inconsistent with any known craft. Descent at near-perfect vertical alignment, surface geometry reflecting light in fractal patterns. I had no language to quantify. My training insisted on rational explanations. Military protocol demanded an immediate report. But instinct at preternatural gut level since told me we were not observing a machine, not even one built by human hands. Shadows along the ridgeline shifted before my eyes. Not cast by the object, not by our lamps, but independent, alive, moving counter to wind and gravity. I felt a weight in my chest, pressing as if the desert itself had leaned into me. My comms operator whispered a name I do not recall whose yet. The voice came from inside my helmet, inside my thoughts. I documented coordinates, range, altitude, velocity, all correct. But I also recorded the impossible, glyphs of luminous green and violet, hovering on the sand like mirrored echoes of a language older than history. My hands shook. The desert air tasted metallic, not from my respirator, but from some pervasive presence I could not identify. I do not know how long we observed before withdrawal was ordered. Time had begun to slip, seconds dilating, folding into each other. The mission brief had never mentioned the possibility of this, yet I was certain. Something ancient, patient, and indifferent watched us, not from the skies, but from the thin membranes separating what we call reality from what lies beyond. Mission directives were clear: observe, document, and, if necessary, intercept. The official cover: a meteorological survey post near Roswell. Unofficially, we were to recover any anomalous materials, vehicles, or personnel that violated known aerospace parameters. My orders came directly through channels labeled Top Secret Cosmic Anomaly Containment. Every transmission was routed through 3 encrypted nodes, each layer peeling away plausible deniability. The stakes were immense. We were operating in a zone under dual surveillance. U.S. Air Force radar arrays to the north, Mossad liaison oversight to the south. Any misstep could trigger intergovernmental exposure, or worse, expose humanity to forces we were not equipped to confront. Equipment checks were meticulous. Oxygen levels at 99%, portable spectrometers calibrated to plus or minus 0.01. Thermographic cameras in full operational sweep, comes integrity tested every 10 minutes. We understood the hierarchy of threat: conventional intelligence failure first, then political exposure, and at the bottom of all rational concern, the unknown. Yet from the moment we approached the crash perimeter, rationality itself became a liability. Sensors registered fluctuations in gravitational vectors. Compasses spun, not in response to magnetic anomalies, but as if the planet itself had shifted beneath us. Even the most seasoned of USA retired commander from North Africa with 15 years of field experience exhibited a pause. It's an uncharacteristic hesitation that the mission logs would later sanitize as environmental caution. Every protocol emphasized containment. Isolate the site, avoid contamination, and report anomalous findings through encrypted channels only. But we were warned: do not engage the unknown directly. Even so, the operative in Methapart trained to assess, neutralize, and adapt recognized the creeping futility. We were walking into a zone where conventional physics failed, and our military tools, no matter how precise, were powerless against the unfolding variables. In short, failure was not measured in mission success, but in survival. Not survival of our bodies alone, but of our perception, our memory, and our sanity. Because whatever had fallen on that desert plain was not merely a technological artifact. It was a presence patient, observing, ancient, and it would not wait. Our team was assembled with surgical precision. each member selected for skill sets that on paper complemented the others perfectly. On the surface, we were a standard reconnaissance strike unit, a mix of intelligence operatives, technical specialists, and field operatives. In reality, each of us carried an unspoken vulnerability to the unknown, a trait the mission planners seemed unconcerned with or, perhaps deliberately sought. Commander Eli Navan was our anchor. Veteran of North African operations, he moved with quiet authority. His eyes, gray and unyielding, missed nothing less. Occasionally, the shadows moved too fast for him to process. Years of rational assessment had instilled in him an unshakable calm. Yet I noticed subtle cracks, a brief hesitation when the desert seemed silent, or when his hand trembled over the radio before transmitting coordinates. He bore the responsibility of the mission with rigid discipline, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the strange unease that seeped beneath the surface. Dr. Lyra Sinai, our medic, was calm, scientific, precise. Her instruments were always perfectly aligned, her logs immaculate. She had a reputation for treating traumatic injuries in extreme conditions, yet there was something fragile in her attention to the smallest anomalies. A flicker of green in a thermographic scan, a whisper carried by the wind, a shadow that didn't belong. She rationalized everything. Still, she kept a notebook of observations that she never shared, filled with sketches of shapes and symbols that defied classification. Demolitions expert Avi Hawk Cohen was reckless, brilliant, and dangerously confident. He handled explosives with the precision of a surgeon, yet, when the anomalies began, his bravado became almost grotesque. He joked about shadows and lights, but those jokes ended abruptly when equipment readings deviated from reality. I caught him staring at the sand for long stretches, counting things that didn't exist. Communications specialist Rafi Benri had analytical rigor bordering on obsession. He could decrypt any signal, anticipate static patterns, and patch failures before they occurred. But in the desert, he began hearing things: fragmented voices, numerical sequences, patterns repeating where none should exist. I noticed him scribbling symbols in Morse code that were neither Arabic nor Hebrew nor any standard code. They seemed alive. Finally, veteran liaison Moshe Tal emerged as the steady hand of experience. He carried the weight of every previous operation in his posture, and the desert had trained him for patience. But beneath his composure, memory occasionally faltered. He would misplace instruments or recall events differently from the rest of us, as if timelines themselves had brushed against his mind and left faint scratches. Together, we were a machine, precise, efficient, competent. But the desert, the object, the night itself, was already testing us. We had no way to know that each of our specialties would later become a conduit for something beyond comprehension, that our strengths would mutate into vulnerabilities, and that survival would demand more than skillet, would demand the surrender of rationality. We assembled in the forward operations tent at 1:30 local, the desert wind whispering through the canvas like distant voices. The briefing was clinical, precise, almost detached, yet every word carried a weight none of the manuals could capture. Commander Navan outlined objectives with the rigor of a seasoned operative, confirmed the crash coordinates, recover any foreign materials, document anomalous phenomena, and, if required, neutralize threats to national security. Maps were projected on a flickering land board. The site was a shallow crater roughly 12 meters in diameter, surrounded by scorched sand and twisted fragments of unknown alloy. Navan emphasized the environmental variables: extreme temperature fluctuation, potential radiation spikes, and gravitational anomalies registered during initial UAV flyovers. "Do not engage unless engagement is unavoidable," he intoned, his voice low but carrying the authority of absolute certainty. We ran equipment checks. Oxygen levels 99.7% across all suits. CUM units synchronized with base frequency. Any deviation would trigger immediate retrieval protocol. Portable thermography, gravimeters, and spectrometers were calibrated to precise tolerances. Every team member confirmed readiness in turn. Despite protocol, unease had already begun to seep into our senses. The desert air had a metallic tang, subtle, persistent, like a warning we could not yet interpret. Dr. Sinai reviewed medical contingencies, exposure limits, minor trauma protocols, and emergency evacuation points. Avi Cohen checked explosives caches, confirming detonation timers and blast radii. Rafi Benari ran communication redundancy diagnostics, humming under his breath as signals responded inconsistently, sometimes distorted, sometimes whispering in patterns that should not exist. The insertion sequence was outlined next, a 1.2-kilometer hike from the base perimeter. Low-profile movement to avoid civilian detection, night vision optics engaged, no reflective surfaces, silent comes only. Terrain would be uneven, with the crater's immediate perimeter unstable. GPS was to guide us, but Navan cautioned. The region's geomagnetic anomalies could introduce minor deviations. As we deployed, each step on the desert floor seemed amplified. The sand shifted underfoot in unnatural ways. Shadows did not align with our lamps. For a fleeting moment, it felt as if the desert itself was observing, its surface rippling with intent. We moved in formation, eyes scanning, sensors humming, breath shallow. Every crackle of the radio, every faint hiss of our suits, resonated like the pulse of some distant, watchful entity. By the time we reached the edge of the crater, the rational structure of our mission coordinates, protocols, safety margins, was beginning to feel fragile. We were trained for uncertainty, but what awaited us was beyond training, beyond comprehension, and yet no one hesitated. The desert had already begun to rewrite the rules. We left the relative safety of the base perimeter at 2:15, moving in single file along the dry wash that cut through the desert like a black scar. Night vision goggles cast the landscape in shades of green, revealing textures otherwise invisible, jagged rocks, low shrubs, and undulating sand that seemed to ripple under some unseen current. My boots sank slightly with each step, sand whispering against the soles, a quiet counterpoint to the constant hum of our equipment. The insertion route was straightforward on maps and satellite images, but reality began to diverge immediately. The terrain shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly. A boulder that had been 3 meters from the path during reconnaissance seemed closer than farther, as if repositioned between blinks. Rafi muttered under his breath, adjusting the comms unit. "Signal's funny," he said. "Delays. Echoes that don't match distance." No one responded. Commander Navan led with the same measured cadence, hand always hovering near the pistol grip. Avi Cohen, carrying the explosives kit, scanned the surroundings obsessively, occasionally stopping to mark depressions in the sand that did not correspond to any known tracks. "Wind patterns?" he suggested, though the air was still. Shadows seemed to gather in low dips, forming shapes that elongated then collapsed like living ink. Dr. Sinai walked midline, monitoring vital signs. My own pulse accelerated despite the calm rhythm of her scanner. Oxygen levels stable, heart rates normal, but a growing tightness pressed against my chest, subtle yet insistent, like the desert itself was applying pressure. Every step carried a faint metallic taste on my tongue, not from the suit, but from the air itself, as if the atmosphere had been tainted with some invisible element. We crossed the first geomagnetic anomaly zone near the ridge. Compasses spun without cause. GPS readings flickered erratically. Time itself felt uneven hour. Watches never fully synchronized. 10 minutes of surface movement felt like 30. Avi joked. "We're getting old fast," but the laughter died quickly under the oppressive silence. Approximately halfway to the crater, Rafi halted abruptly. "Voices," he whispered, eyes scanning. Faint, distorted syllables, not carried by the wind. A name repeated. Mine. I did not speak. Yet the sound emerged from the radio static, irregular, insistent. Shadows in the scrub appeared to pulse with each syllable, expanding and contracting as if breathing. We pressed onward, every rational explanation faltering under the desert's subtle manipulations. Sand grains reflected lamplight in impossible directions. One step forward created multiple echoes behind us. Avi stopped again, staring at a depression that appeared beneath his boot, and then vanished when examined. Even the most skeptical of us Navan paused, eyes narrowing, jaw tight. By 3:30, the crater's edge loomed in sight. The moonlight revealed the twisted fragments of the object, gleaming, geometric, impossible angles. Light reflected in a manner inconsistent with known physics. Shadows bent around debris as if it existed simultaneously in multiple positions. The air was thick, each inhalation metallic, dense, and somehow alive. I checked my watch. 20 minutes since leaving the base. The GPS indicated a 1.2-kilometer journey, but it felt longer, yet also shorter. Something about this space was wrong. Time itself was tentative here, bending in subtle undulations. We were professionals, trained for all contingencies, yet an unspoken dread had begun to permeate the team. Step forward drew us closer, not just to the object, but to a presence we could feel pressing against reality itself, patient, unblinking, aware. We stopped 50 meters from the crater, sensors active, weapons ready. Every instinct screamed caution, yet we were committed. The desert had already begun to claim its influence. Whatever lay within that crater was not merely alien, it was a force older than humanity, patient and infinitely observant. We descended into the crater at 3:48, a half-moon casting pale silver across jagged fragments of the craft. The perimeter was deceptively calm. Thermographic readings revealed no heat signature beyond the team, yet our instruments registered intermittent spikes, metallic surfaces fluctuating between freezing cold and scorching heat within seconds. Gravity sensors quivered as if tugged by an unseen hand. Commander Navon signaled formation, 2 forward to midline, 1 rear. Avi Cohen carried the explosives kit at the ready, though none of us anticipated using it. Dr. Sinai's med scanner pinged sporadically. Vital signs normal, yet the readouts flickered with ghostly pulses. Rafi Benari kept comes alive, though the static now carried faint patterns, almost melodic, reminiscent of a chant. I noted it in my logs. Signal irregular. Appears intentional. Possibly sentient. The craft's hull was fractured yet seamless. Geometry defying Euclidean norms. Angular planes reflected light into impossible angles. Shadows bent around surfaces in ways that contradicted any known optics. I stepped closer, boots crunching on fine silicate dust, and noticed the ground beneath seemed slightly pliant, subtly shifting like liquid. Inside the main chamber, the air felt wrong, denser than outside, metallic, almost viscous. Our lamps flickered erratically, each fluctuation elongated shadows, casting shapes that seemed to stretch into corners that did not exist. Pale humanoid forms shimmered in peripheral vision, gone when looked at directly. The walls bore strange symbols, luminous glyphs that pulsed softly as if breathing. Dr. Sinai traced them with gloved fingers, her scientific curiosity clashing with an unspoken fear. "These aren't alphabetic," she whispered. "Not any language I recognize, but they feel tensional." Avi crouched to inspect fractures in the hull. "Composition unknown. Not terrestrial," he muttered, running portable spectrometers across surfaces. Results were inconsistent. Atomic ratios defied known physics, some elements appearing and disappearing in the span of a breath. He frowned. "This shouldn't exist." Rafi Benari's headset crackled. I hear voices again," he murmured. A faint low-frequency hum vibrated through his chest. "Mike." Names, phrases, numerical sequences repeated in loops, some in languages none of us recognized. When I leaned in to listen, the sounds seemed to emanate not from speakers, but from within the walls themselves. Commander Navon kept calm, scanning with a handheld gravimeter. Gravity varied locally. Readings oscillated unpredictably. "Keep formation," he instructed, voice steady despite the anomalies. "Every measurement is unreliable. Rely on your own senses." Each other. We moved deeper into the chamber. The floor sloped subtly, though visual perspective suggested flatness. Each step produced echoes that did not match the distance traveled. Sand, glass, and strange alloys crunched beneath boots, yet the sounds occasionally preceded our footfalls by fractions of a second. I noted it, time perception already faltering. At the far end of the main chamber, a faint glow emanated from a cavity. The light was not reflected but intrinsic, shifting hues between green, violet, and a silvery white that burned vision. Shadows within the glow moved independently, sometimes forming humanoid silhouettes, sometimes fractal patterns that defied cognition. We paused, breath shallow. The craft was silent in the traditional sense no hum of engines. No vibration, but it vibrated in a way that insinuated presence. The air itself seemed to pulse around us, dense, watchful. A single thought crystallized simultaneously across all of us. We were not intruders. We were observed. I recorded the time 3:55, 7 minutes since entering. Instruments unreliable, perception unreliable. One certainty remained. Whatever lay beyond this chamber was ancient, patient, and aware of our every action. The descent into incomprehensible unknown had begun. For the next several minutes we attempted to operate as trained. Instruments scanned the walls, spectrometers probed fractured panels, gravimeters measured local distortions, and Rafi monitored comms for any external signals. On the surface, it was routine reconnaissance by protocol. The crew should have been cataloging data, labeling samples, and maintaining formation. Yet beneath the veneer of procedure, the environment itself resisted comprehension. Dr. Sinai moved carefully through the chamber, taking readings of air density and oxygen composition. "Levels stable," she reported, her voice calm, precise. But her eyes lingered on glyphs that shifted slightly when unobserved, as if reading us in return. I noted the anomaly. Repeated observation of symbols produced imperceptible changes in form and intensity, beyond any natural cause. Avi Cohen cataloged metallic debris, cross-referencing atomic ratios with known terrestrial and extraterrestrial databases stored in portable drives. "Inconsistent alloys," he murmured. "Some disappear from spectrum when scanned consecutively. They shouldn't exist." He paused, tracing a fracture with his gloved hand. "It's like the matter itself is aware of the scan." Rafi Benori attempted to standardize communications and instrument feedback, but static patterns began to exhibit non-random repetition. Names sometimes are on-whispered faintly through the comms, often offset by milliseconds. When he tried to decode the signal, it responded differently each time, almost as though it anticipated his calculations. Navan moved silently, his eyes sweeping constantly. His discipline was precise. He maintained formation and enforced protocol. Yet, I could see the strain behind his gaze, the rational mind resisting the creeping sensation that the craft itself was alive, observing each measurement, each movement. He began cataloging fragments. Shapes, composition, and angularity were consistent with non-terrestrial origin, yet the room's physics began to subtly diverge. Light behaved irregularly, bending around fragments in ways our instruments could not quantify. Shadows projected from our lamps shifted independently, occasionally elongating to interact with the glyphs. Even in this controlled, normal exploration, our senses betrayed us. A low hum began, almost imperceptible, resonating through the chamber floor, vibrating in chest cavities rather than air. Temperature remained steady, yet the air felt heavy, tactile, as if pressing against skin and lungs. Despite the meticulous recording, a subtle unease settled over the team. Rational explanation was possible, yet insufficient. Every instrument reading, every scan, every data point hinted at anomalies beyond terrestrial understanding. The environment, seemingly stable, almost benign, was quietly asserting its presence. An unspoken warning that normal ops would soon yield to irregular, impossible phenomena. It began subtly, almost innocuously. At 4:07, I was recording angular measurements of a fractured panel when a soft vibration ran through the floor. But something beneath the sand and metal, reverberating impulses. Avi paused mid-scan, frowning. "Did you feel that?" Dr. Sinai's scanner picked up a faint energy fluctuation, a localized spike in electromagnetic density, but it could not be traced to any physical source. She adjusted the readout. Zero anomaly, yet the hum persisted, tangible in our bones. Rafi Benori's comes headset crackled. Names whispered again, this time more clearly. RK. RK. I turned sharply, heart rate accelerating, but no one else had spoken. The voice emanated from static, yet it was coherent, carrying the unmistakable cadence of intent. Navan raised a hand to halt movement. "Form up," he commanded, voice steady but low. We paused, scanning the chamber. Shadows flickered against the walls, responding not to our lights, but as if they were aware of our observation. One shadow stretched toward Dr. Sinai, then recoiled as if it had been touched. Avi knelt beside a fragment of unknown alloy. His spectrometer readings oscillated rapidly, displaying elements appearing and disappearing with every sweep. This isn't just strange. It's reactive, he muttered. When he lifted his hand to point, a faint glyph glowed beneath his palm, pulsating in rhythm with his pulse. Duh. He recoiled, white-knuckled, and the symbol dimmed. I felt a pressure in my chest, not from exertion, but as if the room itself exhaled directly into me. My pen trembled in my gloved hand, and for a moment I questioned whether the readings in my log reflected reality or some alteration imposed by the craft. The anomaly lasted less than 2 minutes. By 4:09, the vibrations ceased, the shadows fell inert, and the glyphs dimmed. Instruments returned to normal, the air density stabilized, and the coms cleared. To the untrained eye, nothing had occurred, yet every member of the team felt it. Unspoken glances confirmed that rational explanation was insufficient. Something had touched us, however briefly, leaving an impression deeper than any sensor could record. Navan's voice broke the silence. Stay focused. Document everything. No conjecture. But even as he spoke, I could feel the deserter, the craft itself watching, patient, waiting. The first disturbance was minor, yet it had changed the rhythm of the mission. A subtle dissonance had been introduced. Our instruments obeyed logic, but our senses did not. By 4:15, the chamber had shifted from merely unfamiliar to actively antagonistic. Shadows no longer simply flickered, they moved with intent. One stretched across the fractured alloy, elongating unnaturally deformed shapes that resembled human silhouettes but wrong. Too long, too thin, sometimes fractal, splitting into smaller shadows that moved independently. Avi Cohen froze mid-step. Footprints, he whispered. Faint impressions had appeared in the dust where none existed moments before. They were irregular, human in form, yet impossible in placement, intersecting the team's own tracks without crossing them. Every footprint glimmered faintly as if etched with phosphorescent energy, fading when observed directly but returning when glanced away. Dr. Sinai's scanner began to fluctuate erratically. Oxygen readings oscillated plus or minus 0.5%. Temperature sensors dipped sharply then rose, all without environmental cause. She murmured, almost to herself, "It's alive," responding. Her voice was calm, but the tremor in her gloved hands betrayed her. Rafi's Cum's headset erupted with noise, not static this time, but dissonant, layered tones. Harmonics overlapping impossibly. Amid the chaos, whispers repeated our names in a slow, deliberate cadence, sometimes overlapping, sometimes delayed. I could feel it in my chest. The air pulsated, not as vibration, but as thought. Every inhale brought a metallic temps, thicker than before, pressing down on lungs like liquid iron. Commander Navan barked orders. Form a perimeter. Keep light steady. Watch your sectors. But the shadows ignored us. They crept along walls and floors, occasionally detaching to mimic our movements. Then twisting, morphing, vanishing into corners that defied geometry. When Navan swept his hand across the chamber, one shadow recoiled and split into 3, returning to its original position as if mocking our observation. Avi crouched, spectrometer scanning the glowing glyphs on the wall. They pulsed in synchrony with the anomalies, colors cycling between green, violet, and a white so bright it felt alive. Each pulse seemed to resonate with our heartbeats, or perhaps influence them, accelerating subtly, despite efforts to maintain calm. Time distortion became evident. Watchettes no longer synchronized. My chrono displayed for 21. Rafi's readout blinked for 19. Navan's for 24. Steps taken seemed longer, then shorter. Distances skewed. Every measurement became unreliable. Each sense questioned itself. The team paused at a fractured section of hull, tension coiling tight. Unseen eyes, aware of every movement, seemed to press against us. Even rational minds in Navan's, Sinai's, Aviz began acknowledging the impossible. The first disturbance had been minor. This was the craft asserting its presence. Patience was no longer passive. I logged the moment. Shadows now independent, footprints defying physics, glyphs pulsating in response to our actions, time itself in flux. Rational explanation failed. Observation alone was insufficient. We were no longer merely investigating a crash site. We had stepped into something alive, patient, and ancient. By 4:32, the chamber had transformed into a space that obeyed no known laws of physics. Shadows moved independently, glyphs pulsed in impossible rhythms, and the air itself seemed viscous, pressing against our lungs. Then it revealed itself not fully, but enough to shatter any remaining rational framework. It began as a distortion in the far corner where pale light bent and fractured around an irregular shape. At first, it resembled a humanoid figure, standing impossibly still, pale as moonlight, featureless yet vaguely anatomical. Avi froze, spectrometer trembling in his hand. The readings defied every element, every ratio, every known principle of matter. "This can't be," he whispered, voice trembling. The entity moved perhaps the space moved around it. Shadows stretched to meet it, folding unnaturally, merging and separating in a dance that contradicted gravity. Its limbs were angular, elongating and contracting, folding through dimensions we could sense but not define. Every movement was deliberate yet alien, as if the laws of matter were subservient to its will. A soft hum resonated through the chamber, vibrating through bone and tissue rather than air. Names whispered in layered cadence, some our own, some indecipherable. Dr. Sinai clutched her scanner, eyes wide, unable to interpret the readings. "It's aware," she stammered, responding to us, to our instruments. Rafi Benari's headset erupted, in tones, not noise, but communication. Patterns emerged, numerical sequences, fragmented syllables, harmonic distortions. His face went pale. "It's talking, or translating, something I can't control it." Each syllable seemed to echo within the chamber itself, bouncing off surfaces that should not exist. Navon barked orders, voice steady but strained. "Keep formation. Maintain visual contact." Yet the entity ignored them more rather. It operated outside conventional understanding. A shadow detached from the wall and merged with the figure, elongating its form. Its presence pressed into our perception, an insistence of awareness that made each heartbeat heavy and each breath metallic. Avi raised his spectrometer, attempting to quantify its composition. The device screamed incoherence, numbers fluctuating in impossible cycles. One moment it registered non-terrestrial alloys, the next it read impossible atomic arrangements, then blank, then reversed. The entity's form shimmered with light not reflected but intrinsic, shifting hues that burned memory more than vision. I stepped closer, logging observations. The entity tilted its head, or the space tilted around it, watched, aware, patient. I felt weight in my chest, a pressing inevitability, as if reality itself demanded acquiescence. Shadows crept along my arms, light fractured across walls that should have been flat, and the hum of the chamber became a pulse in my own heartbeat. Then a faint whisper: "Observe, record, understand, or be forgotten." Not from the entity, not from the walls, not even from sound as we know it. It existed simultaneously everywhere in the chamber. We remained still, instruments useless, breaths shallow, hearts accelerating. Rational minds were no longer tools. They were obstacles, fragile vessels under strain. For the first time, it was undeniable. We had not discovered an object. We had discovered a consciousness. It was aware of us, patient, and utterly indifferent to our comprehension or survival. The moment after the entity revealed itself, the chamber became less a place and more an extension of its will. Shadows no longer mirrored us. They invaded us, curling around limbs, infiltrating vision, and stretching perception. The hum had grown into a pulse, synchronous with every heartbeat, vibrating beneath the skin like an invasive rhythm. Dr. Sinai was the first to falter. Her scanner readings became indecipherable. Oxygen levels remained nominal, yet each breath felt labored, dense, and metallic, as though the chamber had thickened the air around her lungs. Then her hands, steady for years, began tracing symbols on her gloves that were not there before. She looked at me, eyes wide and uncomprehending. I don't know what I'd just written. It's alive," she stammered. The glyphs pulsed in response, faintly glowing, then vanished, leaving no trace but an imprint on perception. Avi Cohen muttered under his breath, then screamed. The spectrometer readings went haywire. Possible alloys manifested and disappeared in cycles. He reached to touch a fragment, and the moment his skin made contact, his arm elongated slightly, subtly, unnaturally. It's not grotesque, but wrong bones stretched beyond rational geometry. Avi recoiled, stumbling backward, eyes wide. His laughter turned into shrieks, half mad, half delirious. It's shaping me, folding me into it. He clawed at his arm. The shape corrected itself once removed from the panel, yet his hands now occasionally refracted light into strange angles. Crystalline and alien. Afi Benariz's Cum's unit became a conduit. Signals no longer transmitted outward, they transmitted inward. His voice began blending with static tones. Syllables alternated between human and synthetic. When he spoke, it was accompanied by harmonic dissonances only he could hear. I watched as he tilted his head, eyes rolling slightly, a faint blue glow along his pupils. "It talks through me," he whispered. I can't control it." Every sequence he decoded seemed to alter the chamber, symbols pulsing in response to the frequencies emitted by his own altered vocalizations. Navon, stoic until now, confronted an impossible perception shift. Every step he took was duplicated, yet not mirrored in echo, moving independently, intersecting walls and corners that didn't exist. Time stuttered around him. His wristwatch spun backward and forward unpredictably. He barked orders, but occasionally the words emerged altered, reversed, or in languages no one recognized. Even his rational mind, trained for decades, began to falter. He hesitated for half-seconds that stretched into eternities. I felt my own senses betray me. Peripheral shadows twisted with impossible symmetry, whispers called my name from angles I could not locate. And glyphs appeared on my notepad before I wrote them, then shifted into forms I could not decipher. Every observation became mutable, every record unreliable. The chamber itself seemed to fold and unfold with conscious intent. By 4:50, the team was altered. Avi's limbs occasionally refracted light, Rafi's voice oscillated with alien tones. Sinai's understanding of biology and medicine fragmented across species and epochs. Navon's memory flickered, some moments erased, some duplicated. Even my own notes began contradicting my recollection. Observations became unreliable, instruments betrayed logic, and time itself fractured. Yet the entity remained patient, watching. Its alterations were subtle, profound, and irreversible, testing the limits of our perception, reshaping our minds and bodies in ways we could not yet comprehend. The chamber hummed in resonance with our altered physiology, a gentle insistence that comprehension was secondary to survival. We had not breached the craft had breached us. Every anomaly now had consequence, every shadow a mandate, every glyph a catalyst. We were no longer merely a team on a mission. We were components within a living, observing system tools to be studied, understood, and recorded. Rationality was useless. Survival demanded acceptance of the incomprehensible, and still, the entity watched, patient. It could wait for centuries, or seconds, for us to adapt or fail. By 5:02, the chamber no longer resembled a physical space. It had become a nexus of perception, geometry, and consciousness. Shadows twisted independently of light, folding through corners that should not exist. The glyphs along the walls pulsed violently, responding to our every heartbeat, every thought, every hesitation. The hum that had accompanied us since entry escalated into a vibration that reverberated through bone and mind. Saturating the senses, Avi Cohen screamed as his elongated arm brushed against the wall. The alloy responded instantly, pulsing with green and violet luminescence, shaping itself to him. His limb bent in ways impossible for human anatomy, fractalizing slightly before snapping back to normal, but the memory of its impossibility lingered, imprinting on perception. He fell to the floor, shaking, eyes wide with incoherent terror. Rafi Benara's voice had fractured entirely. Every syllable he uttered carried harmonic distortions, translating into pulses of energy that resonated with the chamber itself. The walls responded, symbols elongated, rotated, and multiplied. His eyes glowed faintly, and a low-frequency vibration emitted from his mouth, audible in chest and skull, rather than air. When he attempted speech, his words became a cacophony of alien tones. Human intonation twisted beyond recognition. Dr. Sinai clutched her notes. Every diagram, every observation was simultaneously true and false. Her medical expertise fractured, encompassing knowledge of beings that should not exist, prehistoric, alien, interdimensional. She muttered calculations that made no sense in any known physics, medicine, or chronology. The team began to realize that cognition itself was a casualty of the chamber. Navan barked orders, his voice wavering. Focus. Form up. Maintain. The words dissolved mid-air, sometimes reversed, sometimes emitted from Rafi's distorted cum feed. Every command was delayed, contradicted, or duplicated. He stumbled as a shadow detached and mirrored him with impossible precision, intersecting walls and floor that did not exist, a reflection that behaved independently. I tried to log the sequence in my notebook, but the ink shifted, glyphs appearing before I wrote them, vanishing when I looked directly. Time fractured, the watches displayed conflicting minutes, some running backward, some accelerating. Every footstep, every movement, repeated, multiplied, and diverged simultaneously. The entity, if it could still be called that, manifested fully, light fractured around a central form, vaguely humanoid yet fluid, its presence simultaneously distant and intimately invasive. It did not strike. It simply existed, patient, immutable, and aware. We were instruments in its observation, our biology, cognition, and perception, extensions of its will.
Ow.
The chamber pulsed in resonance with our altered states. I felt a pressure crush my chest, a certainty pressing into my mind. Comprehension was futile. Rational thought was irrelevant. Instruments and protocols no longer mattered. The craft, the entity, and the chamber had become a single system, a conscious nexus, testing and remolding us in subtle, irrevocable ways. Then the whispering intensified, layered with harmonic resonance, echoing through bone and thought. Observe, adapt, fail, or continue. The chamber contracted and expanded around us, simultaneously threatening and indifferent. We understood collectively, silently, without words, that the climax was not a battle to be won. There was no victory here, only endurance, only observation, only the patient insistence of an ancient presence that could outlast our rational minds, our instruments, and our bodies. By 5:12, all that remained of certainty was survival itself.
Oh.
The entity watched. We endured. And the chamber hummed with the knowledge that control was an illusion and comprehension a fleeting courtesy. We moved as a fractured unit, limbs trembling, senses warped. The entity did not pursue, yet its influence lingered in every shadow, every pulse of light, every glyph that shimmered in impossible colors. The chamber seemed to contract and expand with each step, floors tilting subtly, walls bending where none should bend. Navan led, stoic yet visibly strained. The hallway to the crater rim, the route we had memorized, had lengthened, twisted. Distances contradicted expectation. Our boots struck surfaces that sometimes gave with liquid pliancy, sometimes resisted like solid rock. B. Cohen staggered, his arm occasionally elongating briefly with each step, skin fracturing light as if light itself were being funneled through his flesh. Rafi Benari remained in a near-constant murmur, harmonic tones spilling from his altered vocal cords. The cymbals along walls pulsed in sync with his dissonant voice. Whenever he tried to speak plainly, the sounds distorted, returning from the walls as layered chants. Dr. Sinai clutched her scanner and logs. Fragments of alien knowledge bleeding into comprehension, mind racing across epochs, species, and planes of existence. Time itself betrayed us. Our watches no longer aligned. We had spent 14 hours within the chamber, or perhaps minutes. Perception and measurement collapsed into dissonance. When I glanced toward the surface, the desert beyond seemed unreal. Colors oversaturated, sand reflecting in metallic tones, shadows falling in impossible directions. The moonlight fractured into shards that hovered above the ground. Navan barked orders. Maintain formation, stay alert. Yet even he stumbled, brief lapses of memory overtaking him, steps retraced unknowingly. The craft's influence followed, subtle yet persistent, reshaping our environment in accordance with its awareness. Every attempt to exit felt simultaneously correct and wrong. The ground rippled underfoot. Every inhalation was thick, metallic, oppressive. We reached the final slope leading to the perimeter, the desert outside a place that should have felt familiar but did not. Gravity felt inconsistent. The air tasted dense, vibrating with faint hums that seemed to synchronize with our nerves. Shadows of our own forms stretched unnaturally across the sand, splitting into impossible multiplicities, as if the desert itself were duplicating us for observation. Avi fell briefly, his arm refracting light and shape as it touched the sand. Rafi's voice warped again, transmitting harmonic tones through the static of our radios. Dr. Sinai muttered calculations no human should understand, knowledge bleeding from epochs long forgotten. Navan's expression hardened, yet I could see the recognition in his eyes. Survival had replaced procedure. Logic had become secondary to endurance. Finally, we breached the last ridge. The desert beyond shimmered metallically, air thick, colors wrong. Clarity of distance, time, and weight remained absent. Yet we were alive. Every step forward felt simultaneously like escape and deeper entanglement. The entity did not chase, did not interfere, but its presence pressed against perception, patient and immovable. We had survived the chamber, the craft, the entity, but we emerged into a world subtly altered. Time, perception, and space had shifted. Our mission protocols were irrelevant. Instruments were useless. And the desert, though familiar in outline, no longer obeyed the laws we trusted. We had escaped physically, yet the environment, both within and beyond the crater, had rewritten the rules. Survival was achieved, but at a cost that rationality could no longer measure. By 5:45, the team had exited the chamber, but we were no longer the same. The desert outside appeared familiar, yet subtly wrong shadows fell in impossible directions. Colors shimmered metallically, and the air tasted heavy, dense, alive. Every breath reminded us that survival had been negotiated, not earned. Avi Cohen was the first to demonstrate a lasting alteration. His arm, which had elongated and refracted light inside the chamber, now occasionally split into sublims, translucent and crystalline. The appendages had no blood, no muscle, yet moved in coordination with his will, unbidden. He flexed his fingers experimentally, watching a fifth, sixth, and seventh phalanx stretch and fold before snapping back. There was no pain, only the uncanny sensation of incompleteness and wrongness. Rafi Benari had become a conduit. His voice now contained alternating harmonics and electronic static. When he spoke normally, the words returned distorted, layered with alien tones. Radios and instruments in his proximity hummed erratically, repeating his speech in patterns that could not be decoded. His mind, too, seemed fragmented. He could process data at impossible speeds, yet simultaneously forgot simple sequences of commands. The entity had rewritten him as an interface between our world and its incomprehensible presence. Dr. Sinai's cognitive faculties were altered irreversibly. Her understanding of biology, medicine, and chronology now spanned species and epochs that never existed or existed elsewhere. She could diagnose wounds that defied human anatomy, calculate life forms across dimensions, and recall processes older than Earth itself. Yet her memory of the original mission fractured, scattered across centuries and alien worlds. Navan, once the pillar of command, suffered subtle memory erosion. Operational details that had guided us through insertion and exploration flickered in and out. He could navigate protocols mechanically, yet recall of context or motive dissolved under pressure. Time distortion outside the chamber mirrored the fractures inside him. 14 hours underground had passed, yet only 20 minutes had elapsed outside. I recorded these observations, though my own perception wavered. Shadows seemed to cling to us, and the desert itself felt attentive. Instruments were unreliable. Rational judgment was secondary. The mission, the Roswell site, the craft. The entity had altered not only our bodies, but the very framework of our comprehension. Each of us bore consequences unique and irreversible. Limb distortions, harmonic vocalization, fragmented cognition, and memory dislocations. Survival was achieved, but humanity had been quietly rewritten. The entity had left no marks of malevolence, yet its alterations were absolute. We walked onward, shadows elongating behind us, the desert wrong, and the memory of what had occurred inside the chamber already beginning to warp in subtle, untrustworthy ways. We arrived at the extraction point disoriented, bodies altered. Minds stretched across dimensions we had glimpsed but could not reconcile. Base officers met us with calm efficiency, their expressions neutral, almost sterile, betraying no recognition of the distortions we carried. They conducted the decontamination procedures, monitored vitals, and logged reports with mechanical precision. The debriefing room was cold, fluorescent, and overwhelmingly clinical. Navan, Avi, Rafi, Dr. Sinai, and I were seated separately, each facing identical black terminals. Files awaited us: mission logs, instrumentation readings, environmental scans, all pre-formatted, pre-approved, and pre-sanitized. The documents bore no mention of anomalies, of the craft, of the entity. Instead, the narrative was clear, concise, and utterly mundane. Routine reconnaissance confirmed. No unusual findings. All personnel accounted for. I attempted to describe the chamber, the glyphs, the time distortions, Avi's, limb fractals, Rafi's harmonic vocalizations. Each word I spoke, careful, deliberate, precise, was subtly twisted by the debriefing officers. Phrases shifted in transcription. My description of anomalous alloys became unidentified debris, non-hazardous. The harmonic phenomena became audio distortion, and Avi's limb irregularities were reduced to muscle fatigue under high-stress conditions. Dr. Sinai's recollections of interspecies anatomy, alien biochemistry, and multidimensional chronologies were dismissed, re-recorded, and merged into clinical jargon. Rafi's altered voice was documented as a minor comms malfunction. Navan's procedural errors and memory lapses were noted as operator error during field survey. Every attempt to record the truth was sanitized, normalized, and archived in non-existent repositories. Outside the terminals, the base continued its quiet operations. The officers moved efficiently. The lights flickered slightly. Shadows shifted subtly, but all outward appearances suggested nothing extraordinary had occurred. Extraction protocols had succeeded not only in recovering personnel but in reshaping the narrative itself. Any deviation from the sanitized version was systematically erased. I realized gradually, with a growing chill, that we were no longer just subjects of an operation. We were subjects of history itself. Any attempt to communicate the true events, no matter how carefully phrased, was redirected, neutralized, or rewritten. Files were sealed under layers of classified codes. Archives labeled non-existent became repositories for our memories, observations, and evidence. We were reassigned. Our altered states were accommodated quietly. Avi's limb anomalies went unmentioned. Rafi's harmonic vocalization tolerated within communication testing roles.
Nice.
Cognitive divergence hidden within research classification. Navan's memory erosion unremarked yet acknowledged internally. Survival. Yes, but only under the auspices of total suppression. As I sat at my terminal recording the final, sanitized version of events, the creeping awareness persisted. The base, the officers, even the extraction itself, fall, were components, in a process designed to contain not just the entity, but our perception of it. The truth existed, but only in shadows and glitches and fragments of memory, too subtle to reconstruct fully. We were alive. Yet in every sense that mattered, the mission in what we had seen had been rewritten, rendered invisible, and made irrelevant by a patient, methodical system of suppression. I returned to my quarters at 2237, the city outside quiet, ordinary, or so it seemed. Every step toward my apartment felt heavier than it should, the floorboards humming faintly underfoot, as if resonating with memories that were not fully mine. The terminal screen glowed dimly, but even here, anomalies persisted. Symbols flickered in corners, glyphs pulsing faintly across the edges of the display, visible only when I blinked too slowly. Shadows moved independently. Watched one curl along the hallway wall, elongating, folding into impossible angles, and vanishing as if it had never existed. Lights flickered in patterns I could not decipher, rhythms that hinted at counting, observation, or communication. My wristwatch showed 23:12, then skipped to 1:46, then 22:58. I checked the calendar. The day had not changed. Time, like the desert and the craft, was no longer trustworthy. The apartment's electronic stereo, laptop, even my small refrigerator flickered intermittently, displaying containment logs and countdowns, numbers scrolling too fast for comprehension. I tried to touch the display. I resisted, slipping through my fingers as if tangible and intangible at once. Every hum, every pulse, every flicker carried the echo of the entity's patient observation. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside my door, too heavy for a human, deliberate, measured. I held my breath. The sound stopped, then returned, slightly displaced. Shadows suggested someone or something was present, yet none appeared when I opened the door. The air felt thick, metallic, alive. I realized finally, that the entity's influence had not ended with the chamber or the extraction. It persisted here, patient, pervasive, aware. My perception of reality, my sense of time, my comprehension of causality were subtly, irrevocably altered. Instruments, observation, rational thought, they were insufficient. The world itself was now a construct. It could manipulate, a space for testing, patience, and endurance. I sit now, recording this testimony in the quiet, under the pretense of ordinary life. Shadows elongate and fold around me. Electronics pulse faintly in response to my thoughts. The glyphs appear, then vanish. My watch ticks inconsistently. My name is whispered in static and tones beyond human hearing. And I understand, the entity does not need to destroy us. It does not act with malice. It is patient. It can wait while we finish destroying ourselves, our perceptions, our reality. Even here, in the supposed safety of my own quarters, I am not alone. Never was.